Hey everyone, tonight's story isn't just horror, it's real folklore passed down for generations. Across Asia, from Seoul's rainy alleys to Myanmar's mountain shrines, there are brides who never found peace. Pale, hollow-eyed women dressed in white, still waiting for their wedding day. But what happens when a living man actually marries one of them? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll learn the terrifying price these men paid, and why some vows can never be broken, even by death. Story 1. In the misty backstreets of Seoul, people whisper about Chinyo Guishin, the spirits of young women who died before they could marry. Pale, sunken-eyed, and always dressed in pure white mourning clothes, they are said to wander restlessly, waiting for a husband who will never come. But what if someone actually finds her husband? Minho was not the kind of man whose name appeared in headlines. At 28, he lived in a small apartment on the edge of Seoul, the kind of place where the trains rattled the windows late at night and the hum of neon signs never really let the darkness settle. He worked long hours at a logistics company, answering emails, signing forms, eating convenience store dinners, and scrolling through his phone until sleep took him. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't struggling either. His life was stable, maybe too stable. Friends described him as quiet, dependable, the good guy. But when their wedding invitations arrived, Minho felt the silence of his apartment growing heavier. Every empty chair at his table reminded him that he had no one to share it with. He had a simple purpose: find companionship, someone to share meals and rainy evenings with. He wasn't looking for passion, just warmth, something ordinary. And that's why what happened next felt so strange, and why it was so easy for him to ignore the warning signs. Minho's world was familiar and relatable. He woke at 6 each morning, brewed instant coffee, took the same bus, and sat at the same desk facing the same grey wall. His co-workers joked about promotions and weekend trips, but Minho mostly nodded, half listening. His phone's photo album was full of pictures of food, not people. Audiences are meant to think, I know this man. He could be my co-worker, my neighbor, even me. Everything changed one rainy evening. Minho stayed late at work and missed the last bus. The streets were nearly empty, the rain turning the puddles into tiny mirrors. That's when he saw her, standing beneath a broken street lamp, its light stuttering like a dying heartbeat. Her white dress clung to her frame, soaked through, but she stood perfectly still. When she lifted her head, her pale face seemed to glow in the intermittent light. Minho felt an ache in his chest, not fear exactly, but recognition, as if he had been waiting for her all along. He offered to share his umbrella. She accepted with a faint smile, her voice soft and distant. And together they walked through the rain. It was the first time in months that Minho didn't feel the emptiness pressing against him. Their meetings became a ritual, always at night, always in quiet places where no one else was watching. She never invited him to her home, never mentioned her family, and always left just before dawn. But Minho didn't question it. Loneliness is a powerful force. Within weeks, he asked her to marry him. The ceremony was small, almost secret. Only a few of his closest friends attended. None of her family came. She told him, with a quiet sadness, that they had all passed away. Minho believed her. Or maybe he wanted to believe so badly that he silenced every doubt. When she moved into his apartment, life felt transformed. She cooked dishes he had never tasted before, cleaned with meticulous care, and smiled at him in a way that made him feel like the luckiest man alive. For a while, Minho thought he had found what he had been missing, a quiet, simple love story. But this was only the beginning, and soon he would discover that nothing about Yuna was simple. At first, it was easy for Minho to ignore. The nights were simply cold. That was what he told himself. But there was something about the way the chill seemed to come from her body, not the room, that made his skin prickle. Even when wrapped in heavy blankets, Yuna's touch was like ice water seeping into his bones. The first time it happened, Minho laughed it off, joking that she must have poor circulation. Yuna only smiled faintly and turned her face away. It was such a small moment, but the audience already senses it. Something is off. Then came the whispers. One night, Minho woke to a soft, trembling sound, like someone speaking through a wall. It wasn't loud, just barely enough to disturb his half-dreaming mind. When he sat up, Yuna was lying right beside him, perfectly still. Her lips weren't moving. The sound stopped. He told himself it was a neighbor's television, or maybe the pipes in the old apartment building. But deep down, the viewer knows this is no ordinary sound. It's a warning that something is speaking in the dark, and Minho isn't meant to hear it. The next strange thing he noticed appeared in daylight. A thin scratch ran down the plaster near the bedroom door. Too straight, too deep to be accidental. At first, he thought it might be from moving furniture. Maybe Yuna had dragged something across the wall while cleaning. But the next morning, there were 2 scratches. By the end of the week, there were 4, running parallel like claw marks. Minho tried to laugh it off, telling himself the old apartment was settling, that maybe the plaster was cracking on its own. Still, every time he traced the grooves with his finger, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. They weren't cracks. They were deliberate, carved with slow precision. The audience can feel what Minho refuses to admit. These marks are counting down to something. They aren't random. They're messages, or worse, pieces of a ritual slowly unfolding around him. It wasn't just the apartment that changed. Minho began to notice the way people around them reacted to Yuna. The woman who lived next door, normally chatty, went silent whenever she passed in the hallway, whispering a prayer under her breath as if warding something off. A delivery man, who once brought packages right to their door, started leaving them downstairs instead. One time, Minho caught him glancing over his shoulder as he hurried away, his face pale. When Minho mentioned it to Yuna, she only smiled, as if amused. "Maybe they're shy," she said softly. But there was something in her tone that made him drop the subject. He told himself he was overthinking things, that grief and loneliness were making him paranoid. But the viewers see it clearly. The world itself is reacting to Yuna. The neighbors aren't shy. They're scared. By this point, the apartment no longer feels like a home. Minho begins to move through the rooms quietly, like a guest in his own life. The air feels heavy, charged with something he can't name. He tries to keep the peace, goes to work, comes home, eats the meals Yuna prepares. But each day, another strange detail piles onto the last. A shadow moving just out of sync, a door creaking open by itself, Yuna smiling a little too slowly when he speaks. Minho tells himself that every marriage has its adjustment period, that living with someone is always strange at first, But the audience knows this is not simply an adjustment. This is the beginning of a haunting, and the warning signs are all around him. This chapter sets the tone for the horror that's coming. Each small, uncanny moment could be dismissed by a logical mind, but when stacked together, they become undeniable. The viewers are now leaning forward, tense, waiting for the first real break in Minho's fragile reality. The cold nights told us her body does not belong to the living. The scratches told us something is being marked, prepared. The neighbor's prayers told us the outside world sees what Minho refuses to see. And the tension is just getting started. The strange things don't stop. They repeat. The cold breath on Minho's cheek at 3:13 a.m., the whispering in a language he cannot place, the 4 gouges in the wall that become 6, then 8, lengthening like tally marks. He starts counting them the way people count days in a cell. That's when Dong Hyun arrives with the folded clipping. He stands in the kitchen, avoiding the bedroom door as if it might open by itself. The paper smells like dust and old incense. The date is 3 years ago. The photograph is small, but the face is unmistakable. Same narrow jaw, same straight fringe, the delicate crescent of a scar near the hairline. Under the picture, the name, Yuna. Unmarried, no surviving family. At first, denial is easy. It's a coincidence, Minho says. Lots of people look alike. He tries to laugh, but his mouth is too dry. Dong Hyun doesn't laugh. He tells Minho to be careful and lowers his voice on a word he doesn't want to say, Gwishin, as if the syllables themselves can hear. The repetition continues. That night, the balcony door is open again. The soup on the table is hot again. The apartment is quiet again, until he turns and she is already seated. The chair never scraped, the floor never creaked. The next morning, the scratch count goes to 10. Minho brings the clipping to work. Photoshop, a co-worker shrugs. Or a misprint. Another says he looks pale and offers an energy drink. No one reads the obituary twice. No one comes to see the wall. He tries to take a picture of the scratches for proof. On his phone, the plaster looks smooth. In person, the grooves are deep enough to catch a fingertip and sting. Each time Minho decides to confront her, something cancels the words. The air thickens. His tongue feels heavy. Her smile arrives first. The sound of his name arrives after. The rhythm is always the same, and it is getting faster. The old neighbour knocks with a small cloth pouch and eyes that won't meet his. For the threshold, she says, for the corners of the bed, for your wrists if you must sleep. She won't step inside. She presses the pouch into his palm, as if passing a burning coal. Do not let her cross on sugar or rice, only salt. Sugar is for feeding, salt is for ending. Minho sprinkles a thin white line across the doorway. He pours 4 small piles beneath the bedposts. He traces a circle around his pillow with a shaky hand. For the first time in weeks, he turns off the light and hears nothing for several minutes except his own breath. At 3:13 a.m., the whispering begins again. Low, broken, sibilant. The temperature drops. The thermostat clicks without responding. Shadows thicken in corners that have no corners. A pale shape reaches the threshold and stops. The salt darkens as if damp. The whispering rises, then thins into a child's breath against the wood. The line holds. In the morning, the salt is clumped like small pearls. He sweeps it up, replaces it, and repeats the ritual the next night, and the next. Each night the breath at the threshold comes sooner. Each night the clumps are larger, as if something is learning how to press on it without crossing. He calls the building manager about the temperature swings and the strange smell of wet earth. Old pipes, the man says. Humidity from the river. Buy a dehumidifier. He buys one. It hums all day and does nothing to the wall. At the convenience store, he asks the cashier if he's ever heard stories. The cashier smiles politely and says late hours make everyone superstitious. On the way back up the stairwell, Minho hears his own name whispered in two voices at once, one close to his ear, one under the stairs. He adds more salt. He sits on the floor and texts Dong-hyun. Stay over tonight. I need you to hear this. 3 dots appear, then vanish. The message marks as sent, not delivered. When he calls, the signal dies. Finally, a reply arrives at dawn. Crashed early. You okay? Minho types back a lie and sweeps the clumped salt again. The old neighbor passes him in the hall and makes the sign her mother taught her. This is not warning, she murmurs without stopping. This is counting. He asks what she means. She keeps walking. The whispering that night begins at 3:11. Strange becomes routine. Routine becomes unbearable. The mirror over the sink stops reflecting her when she stands beside him. Instead, it reflects the doorway behind them where no one is. He tests it with angles and light. He records video. On playback, his own face is there, tired and grey, and the frame stutters any time she passes. He tries to schedule an appointment with a doctor. The clinic squeezes him in for 10 minutes. He describes insomnia, chest pressure, the sensation of waking to a weight across his ribs. The doctor nods, writes anxiety and sleep hygiene on a pad, recommends blue light filters. Avoid horror films, the doctor adds kindly. Minho laughs in a sound that doesn't sound like him. At home, the apartment performs. The chair is never pulled out, she's simply sitting in it. The pot never boils, the soup is simply steaming. When he sets 2 spoons on the table, he finds one aligned perfectly with the grain of the wood, always the same angle, as if measured in a place without rulers. The intensity rises in increments small enough to doubt. Lights dim a fraction too low. Footsteps stop an inch before salt. A reflection smiles 1 heartbeat after she does. He tells himself he is cataloguing, not surrendering. He starts a notebook. 0047, whisper under bed, 2 syllables repeated. 02, 03. Balcony door rattles, wind speed outside, calm. 03, 11, breath at threshold, salt dampens, 19, 20. Message from unknown. Where are you going, husband? He shows the notebook to Dong-hyun. His friend reads, mouth tight, and hands it back without looking up. You need rest, he says, but his voice wavers. When Minho mentions the obituary again, Dong-hyun winces. You don't know who you married, he says finally. It is not an accusation, it is a verdict. Minho decides to sleep with the lights on. At 3:09, the bulbs flicker and dim on their own. He calls out her name before he can stop himself. The whispering stops. A pause, like the ocean pulling in. Then her answer, gentle as always. I am here. He thinks of the wedding. The vows said quickly, the empty chairs from her side, the ring sliding onto a finger that felt too cold even then. He thinks of how love was the word he spoke, and how own is the word she uses. He thinks of the salt line holding, until the night it won't. At dawn, the wall has 12 gouges. He touches the newest one and feels grit under his nail. A phone notification buzzes. Unknown number. A single photo of the kitchen table, taken from the hallway. 2 bowls of soup steam. Behind the chair, the doorframe is just visible. There is no shadow where a person should cast one. He runs to the door, rips it open, and stares down an empty corridor. When he looks back at the message, the photo has no timestamp. The sender field is blank. Strange events repeat. The intensity increases. No one else sees enough at the same time to believe. The suspense builds in inches, not leaps, exactly the way tides drown. And somewhere in those inches, Minho understands that doubt is the last luxury he can no longer afford. The night began in silence so deep it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Minho awoke to the faint hiss of something burning, and as he sat up, a pale glow bled under the bedroom door. His chest tightened. He stepped out into the hallway, and there she was, Una, standing in the center of the living room. Dozens of candles surrounded her in a perfect circle, their flames bending inward as if pulled by something unseen. The wax dripped like blood, pooling at her bare feet. In her hands she clutched their wedding photo, but her lips were moving, whispering words that scraped against Minho's ears like broken glass. He wanted to speak, to call her name, but his voice caught in his throat. The whispers grew louder, the syllables jagged and guttural, and then the walls themselves seemed to shudder. Fine cracks crawled outward from the plaster, splitting, groaning as if the apartment were alive. Minho's breath came fast, shallow, as a hairline fracture split wide and something pale pressed through. A hand. It was thin, grey, its fingernails long and black, clawing desperately at the air. Another hand followed, then another. Soon there were dozens, writhing, tearing at the wall as if the dead themselves were trying to crawl into the living world. The sound was unbearable. Nails scraping stone, plaster crumbling, a wet, sucking noise as the wall gave way. Minho stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the threshold. Una turned to face him. Slowly. Her head moved first, then her body, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. When her face cleared the curtain of hair, his heart nearly stopped. Her eyes were hollow pits, the soft skin of her cheeks grey like cooled ash. When she smiled, it was too wide, her lips stretching as though her face might split. "You are mine," she said, her voice no longer fragile but resonant, echoing from every corner of the room. Now and forever. The candles flared at once, casting the room in a sickly yellow light. Minho's body locked in place, his muscles unresponsive as though the very air had turned solid. He tried to move, to run, but his limbs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. Una drifted toward him, her steps soundless, the hem of her white dress dragging across the ground like fog. Behind her, the hands pushed further through the wall, up to the elbows now, clawing at the floor and ceiling, reaching for him. The apartment stank of damp earth and decay, the smell so thick it coated his tongue. He could hear them, faint voices, crying, whispering, laughing, a chorus of the dead welcoming him into their company. Minho's pulse pounded in his ears, louder than the whispers, louder than his own thoughts. This was no dream, no hallucination. The woman he had loved, married, shared his bed with. She was gone. Or maybe she had never been there at all. In her place stood something ancient, something that had chosen him long before he ever said, "I do." A violent shudder ripped through the apartment, shaking the light fixtures, The wall finally split wide, and a rush of cold air poured out, extinguishing some of the candles. Minho collapsed to his knees, choking on the sudden chill. Yuna's smile widened as she crouched in front of him, her face inches from his, her breath icy against his skin. "This is not your home," she whispered. "It is ours." The hands from the wall surged forward, brushing against Minho's arms, pulling at his clothes. For a moment he felt himself slipping, as though the floor itself had turned liquid and was swallowing him whole. He screamed, but the sound died in his throat. He was powerless, caught between the living and the dead, and the only thing keeping him there was her hand cupping his face like a lover's. Yuna leaned closer, her voice now soft, almost tender. "I waited for you. I found you, and I will never let you go." The last candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Minho stood frozen, chest heaving, as the last hiss of salt faded into silence. For a brief, breathless moment, he thought it had worked. The hands in the wall had vanished, the air in the apartment felt thinner, and Yuna was gone. But the quiet that followed was worse than any scream. It pressed on him, heavy and suffocating, until he felt his legs finally give way beneath him. He stumbled to the door, flung it open, and ran. Down the hallway, down the stairwell, out into the humid night air. He didn't even stop to grab his shoes. The city outside was alive with the hum of traffic and neon signs, but to Minho, it felt unreal, like he had stepped from one world into another. His lungs burned. Story 2. In the remote hills of Myanmar, where incense smoke hangs in the air, villagers place offerings at crossroads to appease the spirits born of untimely deaths. These spirits are said to bless a man, or destroy everything he loves if he fails to please them. But what happens when a desperate man marries one of them? Kothan was an ordinary man, born in a quiet hill village in central Myanmar where the air smelled of wet earth and incense smoke. Life there was simple but demanding. Days were measured in sunrise and harvest, nights filled with the hum of crickets and the faint sound of chanting from distant monasteries. From the outside, Kothan's life looked like any other farmer's. He rose with the sun, worked the soil until sweat soaked his back, and prayed at the shrine near his field like everyone else. But behind his calm face was a man who believed he was cursed. Season after season, his crops failed when others thrived. When neighbors' granaries were full, his were nearly empty. When their cattle stayed healthy, his sickened and died. People pitied him. Some even avoided him, whispering that bad luck followed his family like a shadow. Kothan wanted only one thing: a chance at a normal life. A chance to wake up without wondering if today would bring another disaster. A chance to walk through the village market without hearing the murmurs of neighbors saying he was doomed. It's this simple human desire, the hunger to escape failure, that makes Kothan's story feel so real. Anyone who's ever felt trapped by circumstance can see themselves in him. Kothan's earliest memories were of loss. His father died young, leaving him the fields but little guidance. Every year, it seemed, something went wrong. Drought, flood, or pests. Other villagers advised him to pray more, to leave more offerings for the spirits at the crossroads. He did. He lit incense sticks until his savings ran dry, bowed until his knees ached, but nothing changed. The frustration built slowly. He watched his neighbors celebrate good harvests, build new homes, send their children to school. Meanwhile, his own thatched roof leaked when it rained, and his pantry stayed half empty. One evening, after losing yet another harvest to a freak storm, Kothan wandered into the forest. There, he found an old hermit sitting by a shrine, his hair long, his voice cracked with age. The hermit listened to Kothan's troubles and then spoke softly. "If you want fortune, if you want to be free of failure, you must make a vow. Not to the monks, not to the village spirits, to a gnat." He warned that such a vow was dangerous, that the spirit would protect him, but would also claim him. It would be more than a prayer. It would be a marriage. Kothan laughed at first, uneasy, but the words lodged in his mind. A spirit bride, wealth and protection in exchange for devotion. It sounded absurd, and yet, for a man with nothing left to lose, it sounded tempting. That night, Kothan returned to the hidden shrine. The air was unnaturally still, the candles still burning though no hand had lit them. The smell of jasmine clung to the dark like a promise. And then she appeared, a woman in a crimson dress, her skin pale as moonlight, her presence both beautiful and terrifying. She told him her name, told him she had died violently, and told him that if he vowed himself to her, she would turn his misfortune into prosperity. Kothan's heart pounded. This was everything he had prayed for. A way out, a way to finally stop being the man the village pitied. And so, beneath the gaze of a spirit, Kothan whispered words that tied him to something he could not fully understand. At first, Kothan thought he had done the right thing. The morning after the shrine ceremony, his fields looked greener than ever. By the end of the week, his crops were heavy with grain, the kind of harvest he had never seen in his life. His neighbors muttered in surprise, some with envy, some with awe. Silver coins began to fill his small wooden box. His bad luck, it seemed, had vanished overnight. For a few weeks, Kothan walked with a lighter step, proud of what he believed was his cleverness. But then came the first hint that this was not just luck. Each time he laid an offering at the shrine, rice, fruit, wine, it was gone by dawn, as if swallowed by the earth. The bowls weren't just empty. They were spotless, licked clean, not even a grain of rice left behind. Kothan rationalized it. It must be foxes, he told himself, or perhaps mischievous children from the village. He smiled and said it meant the spirit was pleased. But to the audience, this detail is not comforting. It's the first sign that something is truly there, something watching, something hungry, and it is taking more than what Kothan offers. With each passing day, Kothan began to feel that he was never alone. At first, it was just a prickling at the back of his neck when he worked in the fields, as though someone stood behind him, watching. Then, at night, he would wake to find the candles he had not lit already burning, casting shadows across the walls. When he sat to eat, the air felt thicker, as if someone had taken the seat opposite him. He started talking out loud, thanking her, telling her about his day, as if to fill the silence. One night, he dreamed of her, the Gnat Bride, standing at the foot of his bed, her red dress flowing like blood in the windless room. When he woke, the floor smelled faintly of jasmine and smoke. He brushed it off. Dreams were only dreams. The smell. Perhaps it was the remnants of the offerings. But the viewers know better. The spirit isn't just visiting, She is moving in. What had once been a blessing began to feel like a weight. Kothan noticed that the village dogs no longer came near his house. Children stopped playing by his fence. When neighbours passed, they averted their eyes, muttering short prayers. Kothan still told himself it was jealousy. They saw his good fortune and feared him. In a way, he liked the power. It meant they respected him. But then came the night he tried to leave the candles unlit. Just once. He was tired, he told himself, and surely she wouldn't mind. That night, he woke to the sound of soft footsteps circling his bed. The air was cold enough to mist his breath. A whisper slipped through the dark. "Do not forget me." The next morning, the offering bowl from the previous day was split clean down the middle, as if struck by a blade. Kothan laughed nervously, telling himself it must have been the heat or a flaw in the clay. But inside, his chest tightened. The message was clear. There would be no forgetting. By now, the viewers sense what Kothan refuses to admit. The fortune was never free. The spirit's presence is no longer a comfort, but a claim. The spotless bowls, the phantom candles, the whisper in the dark, they are warnings, not gifts. Kothan still goes through the motions, leaving offerings each morning, bowing before the shrine each night. But the audience feels it. The line between devotion and possession has already been crossed. This chapter turns the story from a tale of miraculous luck into the first notes of dread. Every detail, every vanishing grain of rice, every cold whisper, tells us that Kothan's marriage is no longer symbolic. It is binding, and the bride is not done claiming what she believes is hers. The strange things don't stop. They repeat. Each morning, Kothan sets out the same offerings: rice, fruit, a cup of rice wine, and each evening the bowls return empty, too clean, as if licked by fire. On the third day, he adds a single silver ring to test what he already fears. By dawn, the ring is gone, and the clay bowl has split down the middle, a neat wound from rim to base. He tells himself clay is fickle, that heat and time do this to old pottery. He says it aloud so the house will hear him being reasonable. The next morning, it happens again. No ring this time, only a line of hairline cracks spidering out from the bottom like frost on a window. On the fifth morning, the rice wine cup is dry and rimmed with a white crust, as if the liquid had boiled and salted the clay from within. He taps the cup with his fingernail. It answers with a hollow, brittle note. When he mentions it to the vendor at the market, the man laughs and blames rats, humidity, boys playing tricks. "Clay breaks," he says, shrugging. "Buy lacquer next time." Kothan nods and buys lacquerware. The lacquer cups come back dry too, but now there are crescent scratches along their sides, marks that weren't there at sunrise. He stops telling anyone. Each day the routine resets. Prepare, offer, return, discover the absence. The repetition becomes a drumbeat. Even when he looks away, his body counts the rhythm for him. The night visits begin the same way, soft chanting, like the sound of distant women working in a field. At first, Kothan tells himself it's wind through bamboo, frogs trading songs from the irrigation ditches. He turns on his side and forces his eyes shut. The sound comes closer, separating into syllables his tongue doesn't know, but his bones recognize. On the fourth night, the chanting stops and a weight settles on his chest, not crushing, just undeniable, like a hand reminding him of its size. He opens his eyes to the red hem of a dress just within the edge of candlelight. Dust motes turning in the air like ash. A palm rests flat against his sternum, cool, possessive. "Do not test me," she whispers, and the candle gutters as if the flame flinched at the words. The next night she doesn't speak. She only sits at the foot of the bed, watching. He pretends to sleep, but his breath gives him away. The night after that, she moves the offerings herself. He hears the dry glide of lacquer, the soft click of bowls aligning in a way no human hands would bother to make perfect. When he finally looks, the offerings have been arranged into a tidy circle, the coins balanced on their edges, all facing the same direction, as if oriented to a wind he can't feel. He tries to break the pattern. He delays the offerings, places them at noon, then at dusk, then not at all. That night the chanting is louder. The weight on his chest returns, heavier by a fingertip. "Give freely," she says, "or you will lose more than silver." He thinks of the cracked bowl and his sister's face, and the thought shames him because he realizes the threat works. He lights extra candles. He keeps one going by the shrine long after midnight. The flame burns straight and tall when he is looking, bends at an impossible angle when he turns away. The lacquer cups are spotless by morning. The intensity increases by inches, not leaps. The first change is the smell, jasmine and smoke layered over wet earth. The second is temperature. The air turns oddly cool at the threshold of his bedroom and warmer at his back, like he is standing between a doorway he can't see. The third is the shadows, too long for the lamps he owns, bending toward the shrine no matter where he sets the light. He tries to talk about it. The village headman pats his shoulder and tells him monsoon weather confuses old houses. A neighbor jokes that Kothan has finally found prosperity and now misses being miserable. A monk at the monastery gives him a prayer to chant and asks him gently to avoid superstition. No one comes to see the cracked bowls. No one sits through the night to hear the chanting lift and settle like waves. So he does what men do when no one believes them. He starts measuring. He marks candle heights on the wall in charcoal. He counts the seconds between wind gusts and the sway of the shrine curtain when the air is dead still. He lays a strand of rice across the doorstep and finds it moved in a perfect arc to the side each morning, never broken, as if lifted and replaced by careful fingers. He writes it all in a notebook no one else will read. Fear arrives, not as a scream, but as a tally. He flinches when coins clink. He scans the lacquer for new scratches before he looks at the sunrise. He listens for the gap in the chanting the way a sailor listens for shoals. By the time he notices he's stopped inviting friends in, the path to his door is already clean of footprints. People still wave from the road, but they do not cross his yard. A child points and asks a question. The mother hushes him and keeps walking. The offerings vanish. The bowls crack. The voice says, "Do not test me." The pattern holds and tightens, and Kothan discovers the most frightening truth of all. Not that something is happening, but that it keeps happening, and he is the only one it is happening to. The suspense builds because no one else will hold it with him. It sits in his chest and grows, one perfectly empty bowl at a time. That night the house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums. Kothan sat cross-legged near the shrine, his hands trembling, still shaken from his sister's visit earlier that day. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and smoke, heavier than usual. When he blinked, the candles lit themselves, one by one, without his touch. In the center of the room, she appeared. Not stepped, not walked, appeared. His Nat bride sat perfectly still, her crimson dress pooling around her like blood spreading on a floor. On the mat before her were his friend's drinking cups, the same ones Khothan had used only hours earlier in another man's house. His chest seized. He hadn't brought them home. They were not here when he left. How had she taken them? He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. She lifted one cup to her lips. Though it was empty, she tilted it back as if drinking, her throat moving slowly, her eyes locked on his. When she set it down, the cup cracked clean in two, as though snapped by invisible fingers. "You do not need him," she said softly, almost tenderly, her voice echoing in the corners of the room. "You have me." A gust of wind blew through the house despite the shutters being closed, scattering ash from the shrine. The cracked cup split again, this time into shards that skittered across the floor toward Khothan's knees. His stomach turned cold. He felt like a child again, small before something vast and ancient. The door creaked. His sister May had come back, unable to ignore her fear. She stepped in and froze, her face paling as if all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Her eyes darted between Khothan and the spirit seated on the floor. "Brother, come away," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "She is not your wife. She is your master," the monks said. The Nat bride's head turned sharply, her long black hair sliding like a curtain across her face. The candles flared, their flames stretching tall and blue. "She will kill you," May shouted, tears in her eyes. But Khothan could not move. His body felt locked, his legs numb, as if iron chains held them in place. His lips parted, but his throat produced nothing but a dry rasp. The spirit rose without a sound, floating a finger's width above the floor. Her dress dragged like a shadow as she glided toward them. The air grew icy, every breath visible in the dark. "Your sister does not understand," the Nat bride whispered. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was deep, resonant, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. She passed May without touching her, but the girl staggered backward as if shoved by unseen hands. "If she speaks against me again," the spirit hissed, her eyes glowing like embers, "I will silence her." The windows rattled violently. The clay offering bowls split down the middle. From every corner of the house came the sound of scratching, nails on wood, teeth on clay, until the room seemed full of unseen creatures. May screamed and fled into the storm outside. When the door slammed shut, silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. Khothan collapsed onto his hands, his breath ragged. The spirit knelt before him, her hand cold as stone on his cheek. "You are mine," she said, softly now, almost tender again. "Only mine." Khothan could not answer. He could not move. And for the first time, he understood that his life no longer belonged to him, and that anyone who tried to free him would pay the price. Khothan woke, gasping, clutching at his chest where the invisible weight had just crushed him. The storm outside had passed, but the memory of her face, twisted, broken, dripping blood, burned hotter than the lightning that had split the sky. His ribs ached as if they had truly been broken. Every breath hurt. He didn't wait for morning. With trembling hands, He gathered what little he owned, a spare shirt, a knife, a few coins, and shoved them into a cloth bag. The shrine still glowed faintly in the corner of the room, the clay pot cold but reeking of smoke. He couldn't bring himself to look at it. If he did, he feared he would see the faces again, the screaming husbands whose souls she had devoured. The rain turned the dirt road outside into thick mud. But Kothan didn't care. He ran barefoot, slipping, stumbling, his clothes soaked through. The jungle seemed alive around him, the shadows deep and watchful. More than once he thought he heard her footsteps behind him. Soft, measured, following just out of sight. When he glanced back, the path was empty, but the smell of jasmine still clung to the air. By dawn, he had put miles between himself and the house, but his body bore the cost. His feet were bleeding, his hands scraped, and his throat felt raw from breathing the smoke that had filled the room. He collapsed by the roadside, pressing a hand to his ribs where purple bruises were beginning to bloom. For a long moment, he thought of just staying there, letting the jungle take him. But the memory of her voice jolted him upright. "I want all of you." The words were not a threat, they were a promise. He made it to the next village by mid-morning, looking less like a man than a ghost himself. The locals stared but did not ask questions. They had seen this before. The headman gave him a mat to sleep on, and Kothan lay there shivering though the sun was hot overhead. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the corner of the room, hair plastered to her face, red dress dripping onto the floorboards. Sleep was shallow and restless. He woke from nightmares clawing at his own throat, convinced she was sitting on his chest again. His body ached as though she truly had been. The mat was damp with sweat, and the smell of jasmine lingered where no flowers grew. When he finally rose, the villagers avoided his eyes. A child crossed herself when she passed him, muttering prayers. An old woman pressed a charm of blessed string into his hand, whispering for him to leave before the spirit followed. Kothan tied the charm around his wrist, though he knew it would not hold her. The bruises on his ribs, the phantom weight on his chest, the echo of her voice in his ears, all were proof that she was still with him. That night, he sat by the village fire and stared into the flames, trying to convince himself he had escaped. But every gust of wind made him think of her breath. Every shadow between the trees seemed to lengthen, to take on the shape of a woman waiting patiently for him to look. He realized then that he had not truly fled. He had only bought time. The vow he had spoken beneath the shrine's light was not broken by distance. It was carved into him, binding him body and soul. When he finally stood to leave the village, the fire had burned low, and the road ahead was nothing but darkness. His body trembled from exhaustion, but he walked anyway, clutching the charm on his wrist like a dying man, holding on to his last prayer. Kothan had survived, barely. But he knew this was not victory. It was an intermission. Somewhere behind him, in the empty house, in the shrine that still stood glowing in the night, his bride was waiting, and when she called again, he would have no strength left to run. Kothan sat in the dim light of his house, sweat cold on his back. The storm outside had passed, but inside the air was heavier than ever, filled with the faint scent of jasmine and smoke. He finally understood what no monk, no villager had been able to tell him outright. He did not have a wife. He had an owner. From the moment he had vowed himself to the gnat beneath the shrine, every blessing had been a shackle. The lush crops, the fattened pigs, the coins that seemed to multiply in his pouch. None of it was free. Each gift was a link in the chain that drew him closer to her, one step at a time. Her backstory played through his mind in flashes, not as words, but as images that pressed against his skull. A young woman betrayed, killed violently, left without a proper funeral. Her spirit, too furious to rest, had become a gnat, half worshipped, half feared, demanding devotion from the living to soothe her endless rage. And Kothan, in his desperation, had offered himself willingly. He had thought her a protector, a bride who would bless his home. But a gnat is not a wife. A gnat is a power that does not share. The rituals he had performed so faithfully now felt like evidence against him. Every candle he had lit was a knot tied tighter around his soul. Every bowl of rice, every coin, every animal sacrifice was not a gift, but a payment. And each payment only made the debt grow. His sister's words returned with brutal clarity. "You are not her husband, Kothan. You are her prisoner." And now the signs he had ignored became unbearable. The cracked offering bowl on the night he tried to hold back a gift. The sudden illness of neighbors who offended her shrine. The cup she had taken from another man's house as a warning that she saw everything. Her whisper in the dark, promising to silence his sister if she spoke again. This was no marriage. It was possession. That night, Kothan saw her more clearly than ever. She appeared at the doorway, her red dress trailing across the floor like blood, her face serene and beautiful. And yet, behind her beauty was something endless and hungry. "You still do not see," she whispered, stepping into the room. "There is no bargain. What I take is mine, and what I leave is also mine. Even your sister's fate rests in my hands." Her words struck like a blow. There was no escape clause, no final offering that could end it. The marriage vow had not bound him for a season or a lifetime, but forever. The room seemed to tilt around him as he sank to his knees. His fortune was nothing but a leash, his home nothing but a shrine. Even his body no longer felt like his own. His shadow stretched unnaturally along the floor, thinner, darker, as though something else was pulling at it. Kothan realized then that the greatest horror was not death, but living like this. Every breath watched, every choice already decided, every dawn another reminder that he belonged to her. And as she placed her cold hand against his cheek, smiling that perfect, unblinking smile, Kothan understood. The noose was not tightening. It had already closed. What do you think of these two stories? Would you dare swear that your vows would follow you to the end of the world? Across Asia, ghost marriages and spirit unions are more than just superstitions. In Korea, families once arranged marriages for Chinyo Gwishin, troubled brides who died unmarried, in the hope of appeasing their wrath. In Myanmar, some people still leave offerings to gnats, spirits born of violent deaths, believing that paying homage to them will bring them protection and prosperity. But these stories remind us that some promises come with invisible chains. Minho believes that love can save him, and Kothan believes that devotion can bring freedom, but both discover the same truth. Some vows don't end with death. They begin there. Will you keep your vow and risk losing yourself, or will you try? Escape the fear knowing that it could follow you forever. Let us know what you would do in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more horror legends from around Asia. And stay tuned in the next parts. In this episode, we will explore another story where what started out as a blessing becomes an inescapable curse.